My name is Rosa Martinez, and for 15 years I cleaned the same house, a mansion perched like a crown jewel on a hill in Southern California, overlooking the kind of view most people only ever see on postcards. I was there when the old furniture was replaced with Italian imports, when the marble floors were polished so often they shone like mirrors, and when the children grew into adults who barely remembered my name. I was there through celebrations, renovations, and quiet seasons of grief. I was there for everything, except the truth. Before I tell you what I heard that night, I need you to understand the kind of life I lived. And if this story moves you, if you believe people like me matter, I ask that you click like on this video so I can keep telling what happened. Because what I'm about to share, I never thought I would speak it aloud. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Still am, if I'm honest. I came to this country from Guatemala. I was 28 when I crossed the border, scared, alone, carrying only a backpack and a photo of my daughters. I left them with my sister, promising I would send money every month until we could be together again. That was my mission. Nothing else mattered. I didn't come here looking for trouble, or to chase any dream. I came here to work. That's how I ended up at the Harrington estate. The agency that placed me didn't tell me much, only that it was a long-term position with a private family. I remember the first time I saw the house. It sat behind iron gates, wrapped in hedges so tall it was like entering another world. The driveway curved like a river around a fountain that never stopped flowing, even in winter. The house itself had windows like eyes, tall, cold, watching everything. James Harrington was the first to greet me. He had that kind of smile rich men practice in the mirror, wide, perfect teeth, and eyes that never matched the warmth in his voice. He shook my hand like I was a contractor, not a maid, and told me, "We expect professionalism and loyalty in this house. Discretion is everything." I nodded. I didn't know then that those words would haunt me. His wife, Meredith, rarely spoke to me. She was beautiful in that brittle, distant way women on the covers of magazines look, all sculpted cheekbones and pearl necklaces. She floated through the house like a ghost, sipping tea and barking orders without making eye contact. I never learned what she did for work, or if she worked at all. The only time she acknowledged me directly was to correct my folding of the linen napkins. "We do triangles, not rectangles, Rosa," she'd say, like I was a child. The kids, Lauren and Henry, were teenagers when I arrived. Henry was always away, school, camp, Europe. Lauren was around more, but she treated me like I was invisible. Sometimes I'd hear her crying in her room late at night. I never asked why. It wasn't my place. That was the rule in the Harrington house. Don't ask. Don't speak unless spoken to. And above all, don't be noticed. So I wasn't. I became a shadow. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every smudge that would appear on the windows like clockwork. I scrubbed toilets that gleamed, vacuumed rugs so expensive I wasn't allowed to walk on them without special slippers. I kept the secrets of that house the way I kept my own, locked tight, buried deep. But over the years, I began to notice things that didn't quite make sense, like the locked study on the second floor, a room no one ever entered when guests were around, or the way James would disappear for hours with strange men in expensive suits. I once found a stack of burned papers in the fireplace in summer, when no one used the fire, and there were whispers, always whispers. I told myself it wasn't my business. I had 2 daughters who needed me. That's what mattered. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, after 10, maybe closer to 11. I had stayed late to polish the gallery floors because Meredith was hosting a charity brunch the next day, and everything had to be perfect. The gallery was a long corridor lined with paintings, most of them abstract and cold. At the far end, past the last canvas, was the door to James Harrington's private study. That door was always closed, always locked. But that night, as I buffed the last corner of the marble, I heard something. Voices. At first I thought it was the television. Sometimes James would fall asleep watching old war documentaries. But this wasn't that. These voices were tense, low, urgent. I moved closer, just a few steps, not meaning to eavesdrop, just curious. I froze when I heard James's voice. I'd know it anywhere, except it wasn't the James I knew. This voice was sharp, angry, scared. "She can't talk. If she goes public, we're finished. Do whatever you have to." I stopped breathing. There was a pause. Then another voice, lower, unfamiliar, replied, "Understood." I stepped back, heart pounding. My first instinct was to run, but I didn't. I stood there, rooted in place, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Then the door opened. Not all the way, just a crack. Light spilled into the hallway, and I ducked into the shadows behind the last pillar, holding my breath. A man I didn't recognize stepped out, tall, dressed in black. He walked down the hall without looking back, out through the side exit reserved for staff. When I finally dared to peek into the gallery again, the study door was closed. No sound, no sign anything had happened. I finished my work in silence, hands trembling. I told myself it was none of my business, that I must have misunderstood, that I had no proof, and nothing good could come of speaking up. But the next morning the news was all over the radio. A young journalist had been found dead in her apartment. Apparent suicide. Her name was Leah Whitman. And in that moment, I just knew, that what I heard wasn't some office drama. It was something dark, something dangerous. I wish I could tell you I went to the police right away. I didn't. I was too scared. Scared of losing my job, of being deported, of putting my daughters in danger. For years I had made myself invisible, but now I had seen too much, heard too much, and I couldn't pretend anymore. When I first started working at the Harrington estate, I used to stare at the portraits. There were dozens of them, hanging in the long hallways and stairwells, all lit by soft white lights that made them glow even at night. Most were of James Harrington himself, younger versions, captured in oil and frame. There he was in a tuxedo, shaking hands with a former governor. In another, he stood beside a new hospital wing, with his name engraved in brass. One showed him holding his infant son, a tender moment caught on canvas. His face never changed, square jaw, steady eyes, a calm, powerful smile. To the world, James was the man in those portraits, a philanthropist, a builder, a man who gave back. And in the beginning, I tried to believe that image too. But the longer I stayed in that house, the more I felt it. Something was off. Something was wrong. It started with the little things. The study, for example. It was always locked. Not just when James was out or at meetings, but even when he was home. I once asked if he'd like me to clean the inside. He looked at me for a long second, his smile stretching too tight, then said, "That room takes care of itself." Later, I realized what he meant. No one else was allowed in. Ever. I wasn't even allowed to knock. Then there were the late-night visits. Men would arrive in cars with dark windows, always entering through the side gate. They never spoke to me. Some looked like businessmen, others like bodyguards. Once I passed one of them on the way to the laundry room, and the way he looked at me, like I was a fly on the wall, not even a person, chilled me to the bone. Still, I said nothing. I smiled when spoken to. I wore soft-soled shoes and kept my footsteps quiet. That was my job, to blend into the background. But you can't work in a house for that long and not notice things. One afternoon, maybe 3 years into the job, I was dusting the upstairs library. Meredith was out shopping, and James had gone to a charity luncheon. The place was quiet, too quiet. I was about to change the trash bin beside the reading chair when something caught my eye. There, in the bottom of the wastebasket, half buried under torn envelopes and apple cores, was a photograph. I don't know why I reached for it. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. It was a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. Young, dark-haired, sitting at a table in what looked like a small cafe. She was smiling, unaware of the camera. There were notes scribbled in blue ink along the edge, a name I couldn't fully make out, a date, and something that looked like a street address. I froze. It didn't feel like a keepsake. It felt like surveillance. I put the photo back and didn't mention it to anyone. But after that day, I began to notice more. James started keeping to himself more. His phone calls grew sharper. I'd hear him muttering behind closed doors. One time, while cleaning the den, I picked up the phone to dust under it and found the line still warm. He'd just hung up, and on the screen was the name, Reed. No last name, just that, Reed. It meant nothing to me then. Another time, I overheard an argument through the kitchen wall. James was shouting at someone, a woman. I couldn't hear her side, but his voice was like ice. I don't care what she has. If it leaks, it all falls apart. You handle it. That's what I pay you for. I backed away, heart pounding, pretending I hadn't heard a word. There was one night, during the winter of my 5th year, that I remember clearly because it scared me more than anything else. I was finishing up in the west wing, polishing the silver, checking the candle sconces. That wing had been closed for weeks, supposedly under renovation, though no workers ever came. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. One of the doorknobs to a guest room that hadn't been used in months was smeared with something dark. I went closer and realized it was blood, just a little, just enough to notice. I called out, thinking maybe someone was hurt. No answer. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room looked untouched. The bed still made, drapes closed, but the smell, metallic, sharp. I turned on the light and saw it. On the cream carpet, near the bathroom, a faint stain, hastily cleaned but still visible under the right angle. Blood, not a nosebleed, not a small cut, something worse. I left the room and didn't speak of it. I told myself someone had gotten a cut, that it was nothing. But I knew, deep down, I knew that whatever happened in that room, it wasn't an accident. James Harrington didn't get his hands dirty, but someone else did. For him. Weeks passed, and then months. Every so often, something else would break the surface. A late-night phone call that stopped when I entered the room. A strange man lingering too long near the pool house. A file folder left on the kitchen counter labeled Legal Risk Mitigation. Little clues. Pieces of a puzzle I was too afraid to put together. One spring, I found a torn piece of paper in the fireplace. I don't usually look through trash, but this one hadn't burned completely. It was part of a typed document. Legal language from what I could tell. And the words non-disclosure and threat of exposure were still legible. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. If she talks, we're finished. That was the moment I stopped believing in the man in the portraits. He wasn't just cold. He was dangerous. Everyone admired him. They wrote about his generosity, his donations, his scholarship funds. But I'd seen how he treated his wife when the cameras weren't rolling. I'd seen Meredith shrink under his gaze, and Lauren flinch when he raised his voice. The portraits showed a hero, but behind those painted smiles, there was something hollow. I couldn't prove anything yet. I hadn't seen the full picture, but something inside me shifted. I no longer trusted him. Not even a little. And once that trust broke, I started noticing everything. Every detail. Every glance. Every whisper. Because I had the feeling. One day I might need to remember all of it. It was a Thursday night. I remember because Thursdays were always long. That was the day the linens were changed in all 7 bedrooms. The brass fixtures in the guest bathrooms got polished, and Meredith demanded fresh-cut flowers in every vase. Not the ones from the garden, but the ones delivered from downtown. I had been on my feet since 7 in the morning, and by the time the sun went down, I was aching all over. Still, I stayed late. I had fallen behind that day, and I couldn't risk Meredith finding one single watermark on the glass gallery table. It must have been close to 10:30 when I found myself in the north wing. That part of the house always gave me a strange feeling. The air felt heavier, like it belonged to someone else. Maybe it was because it was the oldest section, or maybe because no one ever seemed to go there, except James. His private study was at the very end of that wing, past the art gallery, tucked behind double oak doors. He kept them closed at all times, and I had never once seen him leave them open, not even a crack. That night, I was dusting the baseboards along the gallery floor, careful not to disturb the sculptures. The lights were dim, just the wall sconces casting long shadows across the marble. Everything was silent, except for the soft sound of my rag moving in circles. Then I heard it, a voice. Muffled, but unmistakable. It came from behind the doors of the study. At first I paused, thinking maybe the television was on, but the tone wasn't right. There was urgency, something sharp in the voice that cut through the thick wood of the door. I leaned in, just a little. My rag slipped from my hand and fell to the floor, but I didn't move to pick it up. I couldn't. The voice was James Harrington's. "She's digging too deep," he said. "I told you to monitor her, not let her get her hands on the files." A second voice responded, lower and more measured. "She's smarter than we thought. She found the offshore account links. If it goes to print, it can't." James snapped. "You hear me? If she goes public, it's over. All of it. Do whatever you have to. I don't care how." My body went cold. I stood there, perfectly still, heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to walk away. I really did. I told myself to turn around, to leave, to pretend I heard nothing. But my feet wouldn't move. The door trembled slightly with the force of James's voice. I had never heard him like that. Not angry in the usual way, but panicked. He sounded desperate, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waving his arms to keep from falling. Have someone talk to her. Make her understand, the second voice said. There was a pause, and then James spoke again, lower now, but no less chilling. If she doesn't back down, remove her. Permanently. I gasped. Not loud, just a breath I couldn't hold. My hand flew to my mouth. Inside the study there was a beat of silence, then footsteps. Someone was approaching the door. I scrambled back, heart racing, and ducked behind the marble pedestal that held a bronze statue of a horse. I crouched low, praying they wouldn't come out, praying they didn't know I was there. The door opened just a sliver. I saw a slant of light, the shadow of a figure, then the door clicked shut again. They hadn't seen me. Not this time. I stayed frozen for at least 5 minutes, maybe 10. I couldn't even think. I just stared at the floor, hands shaking, breathing through my nose to keep quiet. When I finally stood, my legs felt like they weren't mine. I didn't clean another inch of that gallery. I walked straight to the staff kitchen, locked myself inside, and sat at the little table by the window with my head in my hands. I didn't cry. I couldn't. What had I just heard? I ran through it again and again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't what it sounded like. Maybe, but I knew better. I had lived too many years in silence, in the shadows. I had learned how to listen between the lines. I knew what threats sounded like. And this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a man trying to stop someone, trying to silence her. When I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, the words playing over and over again in my mind. If she goes public, it's over. Do whatever you have to. I thought about who she might be. An employee, a mistress, a business partner, the woman in the photo I had found months ago. By morning, I was sick with anxiety. I wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to let it fade like a bad dream, but I couldn't, because that day, something else happened. While making lunch in the servants' kitchen, I turned on the small radio we kept by the spice rack. It was always tuned to a local news station. Background noise mostly. But that day, the voice of the anchor made me stop mid-slice with the tomato still in my hand. A tragic story out of Los Angeles this morning. Investigative journalist Leah Whitman was found dead in her apartment late last night. Authorities are treating it as a suspected suicide. Whitman, known for her recent exposé on political fundraising irregularities, was considered one of the rising stars in investigative media. Her employer, Channel 7 News, has released a statement expressing shock and sadness at the loss. I dropped the knife. Leah Whitman. I didn't know the name, but the timing, the way they said she was looking into political fundraising. I sank into a chair, blood rushing in my ears. That was her. It had to be her. The woman James had been talking about. I turned off the radio and stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. My mouth was dry. My heart felt too big for my chest. I was the only other person who knew. At least, the only one who had heard it firsthand. And if they found out that I had, if they even suspected, I looked out the window, the Harrington Gardens spreading out like a painting beneath the sun. The estate was so peaceful, so perfect on the outside. But now I knew what was hiding beneath the roses and the marble. Murder. And I was no longer just a housekeeper. I was a witness. The days after Leah Whitman's death blurred together, thick with fear and doubt. I still showed up to work each morning, dressed in the same plain uniform, my hair tied back, my hands steady. But inside, I was unraveling. I'd walk past James Harrington in the hallway, and he'd smile that practiced smile, ask about the roses in the solarium, or whether the towels had been switched out for guests. I'd nod, polite, quiet, pretending I didn't know what I knew, pretending I hadn't heard him order someone's silence. At night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, jumped at every noise outside my apartment window. The fear wasn't just in my chest anymore. It lived in my bones, humming quietly under my skin. But fear wasn't the worst part. Guilt was. I couldn't stop thinking about Leah. Her picture was all over the news. A bright smile, short brown hair, eyes that looked like they saw everything. I didn't know her. Not really. But I felt like I did. I kept imagining her alone in that apartment. Scared. maybe knowing they were coming. I wondered if she had tried to tell someone, if she had felt just as helpless as I did now. I couldn't live with it, not without trying to do something. There weren't many people I trusted. My world had always been small. Co-workers, neighbors, my church group. Most of them couldn't help me, even if they wanted to. But there was one name that kept surfacing in my mind, like a lifeline tossed into stormy waters. Daniel Evans. He was a lawyer I'd met 3 years earlier, when my youngest daughter Anna got sick. I had no health insurance, and the clinic wanted to charge me more money than I could make in a month. Someone at the church gave me Daniel's number, said he sometimes helped people like me, people without papers or power. He had shown up to the clinic in rolled-up sleeves, with a calm voice and a backpack full of forms. He didn't charge me a dime. Thanks to him, Anna got the treatment she needed, and I never forgot his kindness. I still had his card. It was buried in the back of my prayer book, tucked between Psalm 23 and a faded photo of my daughters. I waited until Saturday. I couldn't risk using the house phone or my work cell. I went to a payphone near the bus station, the kind people barely noticed anymore. He answered on the second ring. Evans. I froze. My mouth went dry. Hello? He said again, this time gentler. Mr. Evans, I said finally. You probably don't remember me. My name is Rosa Martinez. You helped me once. At the clinic on Maple. There was a pause. Then, of course I remember you. How's your daughter? She's well, thank God. But I need to speak with you. It's important. Are you in trouble? He asked, instantly alert. I hesitated. Not yet, but I think I will be. He agreed to meet me at a cafe near Echo Park, the kind of place where people worked on laptops and nannies walked by with strollers. I wore sunglasses and kept my head down. When I saw him, I almost cried from relief. He looked the same. Warm eyes, sleeves rolled up, a notebook in one hand. He smiled when he saw me, but it faded the moment he saw my face. Rosa, he said, pulling out the chair across from me. What's going on? I told him everything, not all at once. It came out in pieces, like shards of glass too sharp to handle. I told him about the night I heard James's voice, about the words that still echoed in my ears, about the death of Leah Whitman, and how it all felt connected. He listened without interrupting, his face a mask of calm, but I could see his knuckles tightening around the edge of the table. When I finished, he leaned back and took a slow breath. Rosa, this is serious. You understand that, right? I nodded. It's not just hearsay. If what you're saying is true, this could involve conspiracy, obstruction, maybe worse. I hesitated, then reached into my purse. There was something I hadn't told him yet. Not because I wanted to hide it. I just didn't know how much it meant until I said the words out loud. I have this, I said, pulling out the small silver recorder. He blinked. What's that? I bought it after Anna got sick. I was afraid of being in places alone. Afraid someone might say something, or hurt me, and no one would believe me. I started keeping it in my pocket when I worked late, just in case. Daniel took the recorder gently. Did you have it on, the night you overheard Harrington? I nodded. I don't know what it caught. I never played it. I was too scared. He looked at me for a long time, then gave a small, sad smile. You might have just saved your own life. We left the cafe separately, just in case. I handed him the recorder, and he promised to check the audio in private. 2 days later, he called from a secure line. I heard enough, he said. Not everything is clear, but there's a piece where Harrington says, if she talks, we're finished. And then, do whatever you have to. It's not proof of murder, not by itself, but it's more than we had. We began meeting in secret. Libraries, parking lots, quiet corners of public parks. I felt like someone in a movie looking over my shoulder, changing routes home. Daniel brought folders and names. He started pulling public records on the Harrington Foundation, tax filings, donations that didn't add up. The money trail is messy, he said one evening as we sat by the ducks near the lake. Funds going in and out of shell organizations. Some of it's laundered, I'm sure of it, but it's buried under layers of legal protection. We need more. He suggested we stay quiet, keep looking, but be careful. If they suspected me, they might come after me, or worse, my daughters. I can't protect you if they know what you're doing, he warned. I know, I said, but I can't walk away either. Leah didn't walk away. Daniel nodded, but I saw the fear in his eyes too. He cared, and that made him vulnerable. Over the next few weeks, we kept digging. I went to work like normal, but I paid closer attention. I noticed new faces, men in suits who weren't introduced, deliveries that came in unmarked boxes. Once, I caught James arguing with Meredith in the wine cellar, their voices barely controlled. "I told you to stay out of it," he hissed. "You're going to ruin everything," she snapped back. I ducked out of sight before they saw me, but each day I felt the walls closing in. Still, I kept my head down, carried my tray, fluffed the pillows, watered the orchids, because I wasn't just Rosa the housekeeper anymore. I was a witness, and with Daniel's help, I was becoming something else too. I was the beginning of the end for James Harrington. Daniel's office was nothing like I imagined a lawyer's office to be. It was tucked above a bookstore on a narrow street in Los Feliz, with creaky wooden floors and walls lined with dusty case files and old law books. The desk was covered in coffee rings and post-it notes, and a fan whirred quietly in the corner. But what it lacked in polish, it made up for in purpose. Every time I stepped through that door, I felt like we were getting closer to something bigger than either of us could handle. It started with the tax forms. Daniel had pulled years of financial records tied to the Harrington Foundation, public documents that, at first glance, looked pristine. The numbers matched. The donation reports were consistent, but Daniel noticed something odd. Every year, large sums of money were routed through partner organizations overseas. One in the Cayman Islands, one in Belize, another in Zurich. All legal on paper, but none of those organizations had any public presence. No websites, no directors, no events. "These are shells," Daniel said, tapping one of the reports. "Fake fronts. The foundation is funneling donations into them, and then washing the money through fake charitable activities." "But why?" I asked. "Why go through all this trouble?" "Because the money doesn't stay in charity accounts. It goes into political campaigns, personal investments, real estate portfolios, and when someone gets too close to the truth," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. That's what Leah Whitman had uncovered. Through a journalist friend, Daniel got access to part of Leah's unfinished report, a document she had encrypted and saved to a cloud server under an alias. It was Daniel's friend who cracked the security question. The answer was Sophia, her niece's name. Inside the report were notes from interviews, receipts, phone logs, and photos, including one of James Harrington shaking hands with a known lobbyist who had been indicted for fraud in another state. Another file tracked thousands of dollars in donations made in the names of people who didn't exist. One folder was labeled Senate-Run Strategy. It was a plan, a roadmap. Harrington had been grooming his public image for a future in politics, and the foundation was his war chest. "And she found it all," I whispered, staring at the screen. "She did," Daniel said quietly, "and they made sure she couldn't publish it." We sat in silence for a long time. The weight of what we knew, what we were confirming piece by piece, sat heavy between us. That week, things began to shift. It started small. One night, I noticed a black car parked across the street from my apartment. It was there when I got home. Still there 2 hours later when I went to check the mailbox. No one got out. The windows were too dark to see inside. The next day, a man approached me on my way to the grocery store. He was in his 30s, wearing a baseball cap and jeans. "You Rosa Martinez?" he asked casually. I hesitated. "Who's asking?" "Just a friend. Someone who thinks you might be better off somewhere far away." He smiled, handed me an envelope, and walked off like we were old friends saying goodbye. Inside were $10,000 in cash, all hundreds. No note, no signature. I took it straight to Daniel. "They're watching you," he said grimly, "and they want you gone." "I'm not leaving," I told him. "I lived in silence for 15 years. I won't be quiet now." But the fear was real, and it wasn't just mine anymore. I had family. I had daughters. That night, I called Anna and told her not to answer the door unless it was someone she knew. I asked my sister to keep them inside. I told her it was just a precaution, nothing serious. But my voice cracked, and I knew she didn't believe me. Then came the break-in. It was a Tuesday. I got home late after meeting with Daniel. My apartment was on the second floor of a small building in Highland Park. Nothing fancy. The lock had been changed by the landlord a few months ago, and I always double-checked it. That night, the door was slightly ajar. I stopped in the hallway. My keys shook in my hand. Slowly, I pushed the door open with the tip of my shoe. The lights were off. I reached for the switch, but it didn't work. I stepped inside and froze. My drawers were open, my couch cushions slashed, the contents of my cabinets dumped onto the floor. My clothes, even my underthings, had been torn from the closet and scattered. They hadn't stolen anything. Not really. The TV was still there, my old laptop untouched. But my notebooks, the ones I had filled with dates and details from the mansion, were gone. And so was the backup flash drive I had hidden under my bed. This wasn't a robbery. It was a warning. I backed out of the apartment, phone already in hand, and called Daniel. He met me within 30 minutes. He didn't ask many questions, just looked around the wreckage and nodded to himself. "We're running out of time," he said. He brought me back to his place that night, let me sleep on his couch. It wasn't much, but it was safe. We locked the door, pulled the curtains, and stayed up till dawn going over every file we had managed to gather. "What are we going to do?" I asked him. My voice was small. I felt smaller. "We're going to expose him," Daniel said. "All of it. But how? He's powerful. He knows people. He owns the story." Then we changed the ending. I looked at him, tired, unshaven, eyes red from hours of reading, and realized something. He wasn't doing this just for me anymore. He was in it. We both were. And we couldn't stop now, even if it meant everything would get worse before it got better. Because now, we had a new mission, not just to tell the truth, but to make the world hear it. The sky was still dark when Daniel and I left his apartment. The streets of Los Angeles were quiet in that strange pre-dawn hour when the city feels like it's holding its breath. I hadn't slept. Neither had he. But it didn't matter anymore. We had decided today was the day we would retrieve the tape. Not the one Daniel had listened to already. That was a copy, and copies could be corrupted, stolen, or discredited. We needed the original, the one I had hidden months earlier, when fear still gnawed at my spine like a second shadow. We took Daniel's car and drove in silence to my old building. My apartment door still showed signs of the break-in. The wood cracked around the lock, the frame slightly warped. But that wasn't our concern anymore. What mattered was what I had hidden beneath the floorboards in the hallway closet. I hadn't even told Daniel about it until the night before. I kept it secret because I had been afraid it would make me a target, afraid he would take it and vanish, afraid it would mean the end of the only thing keeping me safe. But now I knew that silence was no longer protection. It was a trap, and the only way out was forward. I knelt in the closet, pulled back the thin rug, and used a butter knife from the emergency kit to pry up the loose floorboard. My fingers trembled as I reached in. There it was, a small, black digital recorder. Scratched, dusty, but intact. I handed it to Daniel. "Let's find out how bad this really is," I said. We drove to his office. There, behind the locked door and the buzz of an old fluorescent light, Daniel plugged in the recorder to his laptop. He pressed play. At first it was faint. The hum of a room, a chair creaking, the rustle of papers. Then a voice. James Harrington's voice. Clear, clipped, and unmistakable. "No, I don't care what she's uncovered. She's not our concern anymore. She's a liability." A pause. Then, "If she talks, everything falls apart. You understand me? Everything. I want it handled. Take care of it." My stomach turned. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, jaw tight. "That's it," he whispered. "That's conspiracy. That's intent. If we get this into the right hands..." But who were the right hands? We couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Too many of them were funded by the very people behind the foundation. The district attorney had appeared at Harrington's charity gala just a few months prior. We needed someone outside the system. Someone brave enough to take the risk. That's when I thought of her. Clara Mitchell. She wasn't famous like Leah had been, but she was relentless. A local reporter for a bilingual online publication, she had once interviewed me for a story on undocumented domestic workers. I had trusted her. She had listened. She had treated me like I mattered. We reached out using a burner phone. Daniel sent an encrypted message. She replied within 2 hours. We met Clara in the back of a tiny Mexican cafe in Silver Lake. She wore jeans, a black hoodie, and had 2 phones in her backpack. Her dark hair was tied in a braid, and her eyes lit up with focus the moment we slid the recorder across the table. She listened. She didn't speak until it finished. "This is enough to destroy him," she said, "but it's also dangerous. You know that, right?" "I know," I replied. She looked at me, searching my face. "You sure you're ready for this? They'll come after you." "They already did." She nodded, and the interview began. Not with cameras, not with a microphone, just a notebook and a pen. She asked about the night I overheard the conversation, about my years in the house, about what I had seen, what I had felt. I told her everything. The fear, the silence, the day I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. When it was over, Clara promised to protect my identity until I gave her permission to reveal it. She would cross-check the Foundation's filings, verify Leah Whitman's research, and prepare the piece with the help of her editor and a lawyer. "We'll publish in less than a week," she said. "When we do, there's no going back." That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at Daniel's, sleeping on the couch, my dreams thick with shadows. The threats started again almost immediately. First came the anonymous texts. "Careful what you say. Some things are better left buried." Then the photo, sent to Daniel's email. It was a picture of my 2 daughters, taken outside their school in Guatemala. The angle was too close to be casual. Daniel slammed his laptop shut. "We need to call someone." "No police," I said. "Not yet. Rosa, they're watching your family." I know. Every cell in my body screamed to run, to pack a bag, fly to Guatemala, scoop up my girls, and disappear. But I also knew that if I ran, it would all be for nothing. Leah would have died in vain. So would my silence, and the cycle would continue. That night, I sat with Daniel on the steps outside his apartment building. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, I asked, "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Every day, but I'd rather be afraid and right than safe and wrong." I nodded. "Me too." The next morning, Clara called. Her voice was tense. "They know," she said. "I got a cease and desist letter this morning. No name. Just a law firm and a threat to sue for defamation if we publish anything. Are you stopping?" I asked. "Hell no," she said. "But it means they're scared." That gave me strength. Over the next few days, Clara sent drafts of the article. I read them in pieces, my hands trembling, seeing my life on paper in a way I never had before. Seeing Leah's work come to life again. Seeing James Harrington stripped of his portrait-perfect mask. I called my sister and warned her to be extra careful. I made Daniel promise to protect the audio files. And I waited, because the moment we pressed publish, everything would change. But I wasn't running anymore. I was ready to speak. The courthouse was nothing like I imagined. No grand marble staircases or men in wigs like in the movies. Just beige walls, tired eyes, and an old vending machine that hadn't worked in years. Still, it felt like a cathedral of sorts. A place where truth could finally stretch its legs. Where I could say the words I had swallowed for too long. They called it a closed hearing. No cameras, no reporters in the room. Just me, Daniel, a federal judge with silver hair, 2 prosecutors, and a small group of government observers. On the other side sat James Harrington, not in a $1,000 suit this time, but in a dark blazer that somehow looked borrowed. He didn't smile when he saw me. His eyes followed me as I took my seat, but they were blank, not even angry. Just hollow. Daniel leaned close before it started and whispered, "You don't owe them perfection. Just the truth." So I told it. I told them about the 15 years I spent walking on eggshells, about the locked doors, the coded conversations, the Foundation paperwork that never quite added up. I told them about Leah Whitman, about the night her name became a death sentence. I told them how I recorded that conversation, not for justice, not at first, but out of fear. I told them about the break-in, the threats, the money offered to make me disappear. I told them I was afraid every day, but more afraid of silence. When I finished, no one clapped, no one smiled, but I saw it in their eyes. They believed me. Daniel stood next, presenting the evidence like a maestro conducting a quiet, devastating symphony. Bank statements, audio recordings, emails from encrypted servers, Leah's unpublished report, Clara Mitchell's journalistic findings. The whole web unraveled, and James sat through it with a clenched jaw and a flickering pulse in his neck. They didn't arrest him in the courtroom. That came later, 2 days after the hearing, in the early morning outside his gated estate. Cameras were waiting. Somehow, someone had tipped off the press. I watched it on Daniel's laptop. James Harrington in handcuffs, sunglasses on, jaw tight. Meredith stood in the doorway in a silk robe, her face unreadable. The charges were heavy. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and most damning of all, accessory to murder. They called me the key witness in every headline that followed. The maid who brought down a titan, whistleblower from the shadows. I hated the attention, but I understood it. The world was finally seeing me, really seeing me, but not for who I had been in that house. Not for the woman who dusted their bookshelves and folded their sheets. For the woman who said no, who stood up. The media storm that followed was like a hurricane. Reporters camped outside my building. TV vans lined the street. Clara's story went viral within hours, picked up by major outlets. They wanted interviews, photo shoots, documentaries. One network even offered me a book deal. I turned them all down. I didn't do this to be famous. I did it so no one else would end up like Leah. Instead, I focused on something I had dreamed of for more than a decade, reuniting with my daughters. It wasn't easy. There were forms, legal battles, consulate visits. But Daniel helped, every step of the way. And when I stood at the arrivals gate in LAX, watching two young women walk toward me with tear-streaked faces and open arms, I knew every risk, every sleepless night, had been worth it. Anna was taller than I remembered. She had my eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Maria, quieter, held on to me like she never wanted to let go. We stood there for minutes, just holding each other. For the first time in years, I was whole. We moved into a small apartment in the valley. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, creaky floors, but it was ours. I got a job at a nonprofit that helped immigrant women find housing and legal support. Clara introduced me to a few people, and before long, I was training to be an outreach coordinator. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was helping others find their voice too. As for the Harrington estate, it stood empty, seized by the state. The gates, once so imposing, now rusted at the hinges. Grass grew wild in the once manicured gardens. I passed by once, just once, and looked at that place not as a prison, but as proof that even the most powerful fall, that secrets, no matter how buried, can rise. Sometimes I get recognized in grocery stores or on the bus. People come up and thank me, ask if I'm the woman from the article. I smile politely, but I never say yes. I don't need the spotlight to know who I am. I know now that being heard doesn't require a podium. It just takes one moment of courage, one step into the light, and I took it. It had been almost 9 months since I last stepped foot near the Harrington estate. I hadn't meant to come back. Not really. I was just walking one afternoon, taking a longer route home from the market, the air warm and still, when my feet led me toward the hill I used to climb every morning for 15 years. Muscle memory, I suppose, or something deeper, something unfinished. I stopped at the base of the familiar stone driveway, now cracked with weeds sprouting between the edges. The iron gates, once guarded and polished weekly, now hung slightly ajar, rust beginning to eat at their once pristine edges. The security camera on the brick post was broken. Its lens pointed to the ground like a blind eye, and beyond it, the house itself, silent, lifeless, hollow, a monument to everything built on lies. I didn't go in. I just stood there, outside the gate, watching the mansion as the sun cast long shadows across its walls. Once, I had entered through those gates each morning before dawn, carrying my silence like a second skin. I had dusted those chandeliers, swept those marble floors, folded towels no one used. I had heard things I was never meant to hear, seen things I was supposed to ignore. Now I stood free. The news cycle had long moved on. After James Harrington's arrest, there were weeks of media frenzy, headlines, expert panels, documentaries in the works. Then another scandal came along, and the cameras left. But I was still here, walking in the world he once controlled, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. My legal status came through 2 months ago. Daniel handled the paperwork himself, and I still remember the way he smiled when he handed me the envelope. "You earned this," he said, every line of it. The settlement wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to pay off my sister's debts in Guatemala, enough to fly my daughters here legally, enough to rent a small but decent apartment in Reseda with 2 bedrooms and a little balcony where I grow tomatoes and basil in old paint buckets. We have dinner together every night. Maria loves to cook, and Anna is studying to be a nurse. I help them with their English, and they help me fill out forms, set up doctor's appointments, navigate the little digital worlds I never had time to learn before. We laugh more than I thought possible. Sometimes we cry too. There are wounds that take time, but we're healing. Together. I still work. I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. It's who I am. But now I work for a nonprofit that supports immigrant women. Women like me, who come here with nothing but their stories and their hopes. I sit across from them in offices with stained carpets and flickering lights, and I listen. I help them fill out forms, write statements, get their kids into school. I don't wear a uniform anymore. I don't keep my eyes down. Sometimes I think about Leah, about the way her story nearly disappeared. I visit her grave when I can. I bring flowers. I whisper thank you. It's not enough, but it's something. She risked everything for the truth. So did I. And now, I carry both our voices. There are still nights when I wake up reaching for the recorder I no longer carry. Still mornings when I double lock the door without thinking. Trauma doesn't vanish. It softens. It stops being the center and becomes just one more thread in the fabric of who you are. Standing outside the Harrington estate, I took one last look at the windows, now clouded with dust. I thought of James, sitting in some prison cell far from here, his name stripped from awards and buildings. The world no longer saw him as a hero, and for once, the truth had won. I turned to walk away, and as I did, I realized I had something else to say. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but stories like mine are too often left in the dark. So if you believe it mattered, if you believe voices like mine deserve to be heard, then I ask you to share this. Like this video. Leave a comment. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have risked your job, your safety, your family, to speak up? Or would you have stayed quiet? There's no judgment in your answer, just reflection. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories from people who've lived invisible lives until one moment changed everything, subscribe to this channel. Because silence is the enemy of truth, and sometimes, just sometimes, someone like me gets the chance to break it. Through the gates, I walked, free.